abandon their protest to clear the square to go home. The appeal came from the army's top general in Cairo, who met anti-Mubarak campaigners face to face. He asked them to think of Egypt and go, so business and life could get back to normal.
We need to open this road. This road is blocking traffic. There are a lot of government offices that need to be open, and if we don't open this road, people won't be able to work. Also, we need to clean up this area.
The government has tried to get things back on track throughout Saturday. It started with the president meeting senior members of his cabinet and talking about the economy. And then the Prime Minister told state TV that slowly it was business as usual.
I mean, for every day that goes, stability returns and we are more hopeful. We no longer see the events happening like last Friday, and security forces are gradually returning. Today you don't hear about more clashes, which shows that generally things are getting better. The opposition itself is very divided. But this doesn't mean that we won't talk to all parties. In the end, the main thrust of their demands is the same.
Night has come to Liberation Square, and with it inevitably a rise in tension, a worry of what the darkness may hide. The government wants the protesters to move. We have no intention of going anywhere. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera.
These are the latest pictures coming out of Liberation Square in Cairo. Our correspondent, who we're not naming for his own security, is live with us on the line. Just bring us up to speed with what you're seeing in terms of movements on the ground.
Well, currently it's very quiet, much quieter, in fact, than it was last night. The square seems considerably emptier, actually. There certainly isn't the tension that we saw in recent days, even less so than last night. The military presence is far less. Some of the roadblocks, or most of the roadblocks, actually have disappeared. And it's been pretty quiet all day. There was a bit of an incident earlier in the day when the army moved in towards the barricades to try and negotiate with the protesters to remove those barricades. And obviously a little bit of tension, as you mentioned in the report, with the general in the square appealing to the protesters to leave. But it's currently very quiet. There aren't the chants that we heard last night. Pretty calm all round, really.
And of course, it's been a busy day in terms of the politicking that's been going on away from the square. The general committee, the main leadership of the NDP resigning, and of course, as you said, senior army officials also arriving on the scene, trying to clear some of the protesters.
Well, that's right. I mean, certainly the most significant day so far in terms of political movements. But these are being seen by many as obviously as massive concessions. Certainly with respect to the future of the country's leadership as well. I think it's being seen as being highly significant. That Gamal, Hosni Mubarak's son, was resigned with the group. They've also, obviously, as you mentioned, talks are with respect to the economy. That's playing a lot on the fears of people here on the streets. It still seems, though, very much that Mubarak is standing his ground, and at the same time, so are the protesters, are certainly the hardcore that remain here in the square.
And of course, the general mood still seems to be, from what we understand, as quite optimistic.
Optimistic in the square, do you mean?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. I'd say optimistic. There's certainly quite an interesting feeling to the square in the afternoon. The rain started falling. As I say, the military were moving around the square, removing some of the burnt-out cars and vehicles that have lain there all week. And there was a certain feeling of sort of a lack of inertia, if you know, a lack of momentum. But you know, they are sticking to their grounds. I'd be hesitant to say optimistic. But they're sticking to their guns, and their demands remain the same.
Well, for the moment, thanks very much for joining us. Egypt was top of the agenda at an international security summit attended by Western leaders in Germany on Saturday. US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton warned of a perfect storm across the Middle East if genuine reforms aren't implemented. From Munich, Tim Friend reports.
World leaders here are playing a game of catch-up. Taken by surprise by events in Egypt, They're grappling with who would take President Mubarak's place if and when he leaves office. US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton warned other leaders in the region they suppress dissent at their peril.
Some leaders may honestly believe that their country is an exception, that their people will not demand greater political or economic opportunities, or that they can be placated with half measures. Again, in the short term, that may be true, but in the long term, it is untenable.
The German leader, Angela Merkel, who saw revolution in Europe 20 years ago, sees parallels now in the Middle East.
Es ist absolut notwendig.
It is absolutely indispensable that those freedoms that we hold to be universal, freedom of the press, freedom of opinion, freedom of journalism, be upheld not only in Europe, in the United States, or all over the world, but that those who are in responsibility in Egypt are also called upon to ensure that these rights are respected.
The Quartet group of Middle East peace process mediators who've been meeting here have also been presented with fresh difficulties as a result of unfolding events in Egypt, because they've complicated an already stalled initiative. Until a week ago, many leaders at this conference were happy to do business with President Mubarak, ambivalent about his record so long as there was apparent stability. They deny they were slow to react.
I don't think it's about us being slow. I think it's about us being absolutely sure that what we're able to offer, we're going to deliver, because the EU will be involved in the region for years to come, continuing to fulfill the promises that we will now give.
One thing's for certain, world leaders here are desperate to find a new Egyptian administration with which they can do business. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera, Munich.
With the protests against Mubarak showing no sign of abating, many observers are looking to the United Nations to step in. But at the UN Security Council, the issue is not even up for discussion. Scott Heidler has the story from New York.
The world is watching live as Egypt is being transformed, but there's a deafening silence from the United Nations' powerful Security Council. The violent unrest has still not been discussed by the Security Council, not even during closed-door meetings. Will that change anytime soon? A clear message from the 5 permanent members of the Council. Russia.
Mr. Ambassador, are you going to discuss Egypt at all today in the Council?
France. China. Britain. And a brush-off from the United States. And from the current president of the Security Council.
Excuse me, Mr. Ambassador, are you going to discuss Egypt at all today?
So why is the Security Council avoiding the discussion? The uprising in Egypt is not yet an international matter, meaning no other nation is directly involved, nor are there refugees fleeing Egypt to neighboring countries. The Council's position is it's not their job.
So far, there has not been a request by members of the Council for a briefing on the situation in Egypt. I think that the current view is that this situation is being dealt with at the national level.
In its 66 years of existence, the Security Council has never discussed an ongoing popular uprising. It's a very sensitive topic to certain nations. But some feel the fact that those 15 nations who sit here haven't even discussed what's going on in Egypt indicates that the Council is out of touch with the world.
The Security Council was a body established in very different circumstances, where the main threat to peace and security was of conflict between states. These days we see that the main threat to stability and to human welfare and to human life is conflict within.
Moral authority has commented on Egypt, keeping his statements very similar to those of the United States.
It is important at this juncture that it is ensured that an orderly and a peaceful transition should take place. I urge all the parties to engage in such a dialogue and such process without any further delay.
The Secretary General said he plans on meeting with members of the Security Council to discuss Egypt. Body representing 192 nations, any resolution taken up by the delegates would be non-binding and mainly symbolic. They too have not acted in regards to Egypt. Many of them are not considered free nations by international countries, would take the hypocritical step of voting for a resolution condemning what's happening in Egypt. Scott Heidler, Al Jazeera, the United Nations.
Well, there's some confusion in Washington about the US stance on Egypt. Al Jazeera's Monica Villamizar joins me now from Washington. There was an envoy sent, Monica. He said one thing, the US government is saying the other. Do we really know what position they have?
Well, it has been, Sohail, effectively quite a surprise for us. Egypt, since the crisis started, has been everything but uniform. It's changed dramatically, even leading some to suggest that it caught them really quite off guard. But just to remind our viewers of the latest official reaction out of here, the last time the president referred to it, he said that the transition should happen immediately, suggesting it should start